Okay, this is a pretty scary headline, and this is a pretty scary idea that feminists are trying to do all the time. Take a look. Why we should close women's prisons and treat their crimes more fairly. Then underneath the subheadline, sentencing systems around the world should be radically reformed to start with the assumption that women should not be sent to prison for their crimes. So, when MRA say they're anti-feminist, okay, this video is an example of what we mean. And as someone who got stabbed and almost killed by a woman, this kind of stuff is scary to me. This is a serious idea in a serious publication. And it's an example when I talked before about how feminists are trying to legalize murder against men and legalize violence against men. It's never something that's done directly. It's always something that's done indirectly through other ways. Even though they did literally try and legalize domestic violence against men in law, you're going to see that even murder is included in this article for things that women should not go to prison for. So let's start breaking down what this article says. Let's start with the part that I've highlighted here. The differences are so stark that not only should women be treated more leniently because they commit less serious crime, but they should also be treated more leniently when they commit the same crime as a man. Now, I'm going to go back and explain what they mean by the differences in a little bit, but just take a look at that last part. They should also be treated more leniently when they commit the same crime as a man. I mean, that's clear as day. It goes on to say, the sentencing system should be reformed radically to deal more fairly with female offending. The starting position, this is horrifying, the starting position is that no female offender should be imprisoned. In relation to most forms of crime, they should be dealt with by a way of intermediate sanctions, including greater use of electronic monitoring. But the line was there. No female offender should be imprisoned. Now, you might be thinking, what about murder? In the rare instances that women commit heinous crimes, community protection and the need to impose proportionate penalties requires a prison term. But this should be the exception, not the increasing norm. The exception is so rare that the utopia of closing prisons would readily become a reality. Okay, so at least he is saying if a woman commits murder, she should go to prison. Right? This is what he actually says about murder, and yeah, it's pretty scary. Women do, of course, commit homicide offenses, but nearly always the victim is a relative, and the crime was committed against the backdrop of an abusive relationship or depressive mindset. Wait, what? So, if it's a depressive mindset, what does that mean? Anyway, all homicides are heinous crimes, but the types of homicides committed by women rarely involve random victims, and hence do not engender community fear. Well, that's funny because that time that stranger, that random woman attacked me in the street and cut my neck, and the doctor said the cut was an inch away from killing me, that was a random act of violence. She was a stranger and she almost killed me. But what exactly does it mean, depressive mindset, when he said that? So if a woman's depressed, that means she should be able to murder a man and not go to prison? And the whole argument about, well, if she's in an abusive relationship, so she's defending herself, that doesn't mean you should make an automatic blanket rule for all female murderers. That doesn't make any sense. And this is going to be the main criticism I have. The obvious criticism I have for what he says in this article is that people should be treated individually on a case-by-case basis. So if a woman is a victim of an abusive husband and she was defending herself, then that's a fact that you can look at in the case. That doesn't mean the law should be, if you happen to be a woman and you commit murder, because there are other women who are sometimes abused, that means that you committing a murder is okay. That makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And of course, murder is not the only crime. I mean, what about women who commit domestic violence, like repeatedly abuse their husbands? What about a woman who robs a bank or commits identity theft and screws over hundreds of families, or commits fraud with healthcare or pharmaceutical companies, and then people get the wrong medication and get sick or die? I mean, the whole idea is just nonsense. Pick any crime you can think of, And what this guy is saying is if a woman takes a knife and stabs a man, or she sets someone's house on fire, or she steals somebody's life savings, because she's a woman, she shouldn't go to prison for it. I mean, this is complete nonsense. And when you break down his arguments for it, they just don't make any sense. It goes on to say this: there are remarkably similar patterns of female offending and incarceration in the United States and Australia. In the United States, women commit only 17% of felonies, while in Australia, they commit about 13% of crimes dealt with the higher courts. Okay, but so what? Like, why do those percents matter in how someone should be treated individually? I mean, if a man and a woman commit the same crime, then why does it make sense to say, well, because women are less likely to commit this crime, this individual woman will be treated more leniently than this individual man? Let's say they both stabbed somebody, or they both killed somebody, or they both robbed a bank. What does it matter if women do it less often than men? Why would you treat a woman that does it differently than a man? Or in this case, no prison at all. So now we talk about the four differences, or the four main differences between men's and women's crimes. There are four major differences between male and female offenders. First, women are much less likely to reoffend than men. Their recidivism levels are at least 10% lower in both the US and Australia. But again, that's not a reason to treat a man and a woman differently if they commit the same crime. Just because statistically, men are somewhat more likely to reoffend, and 10% is not a huge number, by the way, for that. But that's not a reason to say, well, you robbed a bank and you robbed a bank. But because when we look at the trends of other men and other women, you go to jail because you're a man, but you go free because you're a woman. That makes no sense. Okay, the next reason. Second, when women are imprisoned, they suffer more. They have higher rates of mental illness, making it more difficult to adapt and cope within the prison setting. And US studies show that when in prison, they are 3 times more likely to be victims of sexual abuse than male prisoners. Okay, but again, that's not a reason to have different laws for men and women. That describes a problem in the prison system, which, yes, should be fixed. But the solution to that is not to say to 50% of the population, well, if you commit a serious crime, if you assault somebody, if you harm somebody, if you injure somebody, if you steal from people, we won't put you in prison. The solution to that problem is to make prisons better, make sure the conditions are humane, and make sure that inmates are treated properly. Not to basically tell people, well, if you commit a crime, we won't punish you, or barely punish you at all. His third reason. Third, society suffers more when we remove a female from it and place her behind a prison wall. More than 50% of incarcerated women are single parents, and even in 2-parent households, female prisoners typically assume the main child nurturing role. In relation to non-parental dependency, the majority of carers, 60%, are females. Oh, so the 40% of carers who are men should be allowed to assault women and not go to prison? Now, you might think that's an extreme point, but that is the point, because that is what he's saying. Because flip the question around. So the 60% of women who are carers, they should be allowed to walk up to a man and stab him and not go to prison? Because that is literally what his argument would mean. Because remember what he says, his words, the starting assumption should be no woman goes to prison for any crime. That's what he said in this article. So if you think that's an extreme example, that's the point, because that is what he is saying. And as for the part about being a parent or a single parent, that's not an excuse to commit a crime. And being a single parent, and this may sound controversial even though it shouldn't, doesn't justify assaulting people or stealing, which should be obvious to most people. And all you have to do to see how much nonsense that is ask yourself this: should a single father be allowed to assault women and not go to jail? Well, obviously not. That's ridiculous. But that's what he's saying if the genders are reversed. That's what he's saying for women. So these arguments, you see, don't make any sense because they really have nothing to do with the individual factors of a person who commits a crime. And they really have nothing to do with the crimes themselves. His final point, finally, women are often less culpable when they commit crime. Culpable basically means less responsible. There is a profoundly devastating link between child sexual and violent victimization and female offending. U.S. studies that 23 to 37%, which is less than half, of female prisoners reported that they had been physically or sexually abused prior to the age of 18. The rate is even higher in Australia. Incarcerating females is often simply a lamentable case of victimizing the victimized. But sometimes women are not the victims. Sometimes a female criminal wasn't victimized, and she's hurting or robbing or even killing people not as the victim, but as the perpetrator. And the things that he lists, again, are individual factors. So even if something is more likely to happen to a woman and less likely to happen to a man, doesn't mean the law should say automatically apply it to all women no matter what. That makes absolutely no sense. If someone has a history of sexual abuse or violence, then that's an individual part of their case. It doesn't mean you say, okay, 51% of the population automatically, if they commit assault or bank robbery or assault or murder, I said assault twice, but maybe they did 2 assaults, then we should treat them differently because of the general trends that happen to other people. That just doesn't make sense. See, what scares me is that this is a mainstream feminist idea. This is not some fringe kind of crazy blog that nobody reads. This is The Guardian, and I've linked the article down below. This is what the mainstream major feminist organizations that influence public policy and law, this is what they're saying. And this is what they're teaching young women in gender studies courses and on the internet and on Twitter and on Reddit and on these different feminist blogs and feminist sites. This is what teenage girls are being conditioned into believing. And boys, too, are being conditioned to believe this. And what scares me is the generation that's being brainwashed into believing this. What happens when they grow up to become the police officers and the judges and the lawmakers? Imagine a judge who believes this article treating women who murder their male husbands or women who are domestic abusers. And they don't believe that women should go to prison for committing crimes. Imagine if this actually becomes the law. So not only an ideology, but imagine if this was actually the law and tomorrow 50% of the population wakes up and knows, if I commit a robbery or I hurt somebody or I smack someone on the head with a hammer, I won't go to prison. And this is not some crazy idea. This is not like something, I saw on Fox News and now I'm talking about it. I'm quoting them. This is what they're actually saying. So this is not some like random thing that, I read on Breitbart or Alex Jones. This is something that they are saying and they are trying to push into public policy. And it's a very scary idea. Oh, and by the way, let's take a look at the first paragraph in the article. See how it says, women almost never commit random acts of serious violence? Yeah, I'm going to have to disagree with that one. So when so many feminists or parents wonder, why are teenage boys and young men becoming anti-feminist or becoming attracted to the men's rights movement, things like this are an example of why.